Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Money Guys podcast, where our mission is to help clients build and protect wealth to achieve their dreams and goals. This podcast is brought to you by Leading Edge Financial Planning. Without further ado, here is your host, Robert Eklund.
All right, everybody, welcome to Flight 67, Pilot Money Guys. I'm excited to have almost our entire team with us. There's 5 of us on the call today, and we're going to have a panel discussion about marriage and money and how the hell does it work. So I'm excited to have first time Betsy Barracuda Wheeler on the podcast. So she is super excited to be here, and I'm excited for everybody to hear from her for the first time. And of course, we got Kevin, Professor Gormley, Jon Cremer, and Nolan the Prodigy Clark. So I'm your host today, Charlie the Godfather Mattingly, which is hard for me to say because it breaks all the rules of call signs. But since it's pretty decent, I never had a good call sign before, I kind of let it slide. So that'll be okay. But we're missing Rob today. He's out. He did another podcast, in fact, earlier today, but he's not available to catch up with us. So look, we're going to jump right in, but we know that we want to cover first of all, some aviation news. We've got some interesting aviation news in a recent F-35 crash. Now, this is the second time that an F-35 has ejected its pilot for mechanical error. We're not sure exactly what happened this time, but Kevin, or you got this one, or John, do you got this one?
Well, I got a lot to say on this, Charlie, and
all right, go ahead,
everything.
Kevin.
Everything that I have to say is a total guess and conjecture because it doesn't seem like anyone knows anything. I mean, it's like you watch the news and, the Marines were looking for the plane. They asked people to help. The pilot called in. The dispatcher didn't believe them on 911. So, yeah, I got no clue. That's what I have to say. I have no clue.
Okay.
Maybe John has a clue.
I like it. John, you got anything to add?
No, I think that I think you just have to have all the context clues to the F-35. So there's probably a lot more details out there, but without fully understanding how automated that airplane is, I think, we start to see that where there's not a lot of explanation. It's probably because we don't know the kind of technology that goes into that airplane and what the systems are talking about. So I know that, the F-35 has had its fair share of headlines in the news just because of the rollout and the cost of it. Very technologically advanced airplane, and a lot of it's classified. So it may be a long, long time before we find out what really happened with that airplane, but it definitely made the news because the pilot ejected and it was found some, what did we say, 50 or 60 miles away
60 miles away.
Where the pilot.
Yep, and it's likely to be on. It's likely to be on Saturday Night Live pretty soon as well because the 911 call was. Luckily, the pilot wasn't hurt. We don't know if anybody on the ground was hurt yet. I think my guess is it's probably in the water somewhere. He got ejected, and again, like you said, John, there's some technology there that in Fort Worth, I think it was Fort Worth, Texas. The plane was doing its vertical landing, started a gyration, and it automatically ejected the pilot. He had no choice. So he was ejected. So this may have been something similar. So the pilot was ejected, went to a person's house in Charleston, South Carolina. They called 911, and 911 proceeded to ask how far the person fell, if they were bleeding. And so it was unfortunately quite comical because they were just in disbelief that this pilot had just ejected. Meanwhile, the airplane is probably still flying for another 60 miles is what
Charlie,
like.
You have to say allegedly anytime you say anything.
Allegedly.
And so allegedly, I think the plane landed or crash landed over land. I don't think it was over water.
Okay, over land.
Mistaken.
Okay, so hopefully nobody was hurt there because that's a heavily populated area there. But anyway, very interesting to see what will happen there. But other than that, that's kind of the interesting news story of the day. But the other question is not me, Nolan, not me, of course, but a friend was asking me and telling me that they couldn't remember where all their money went, and they're terrible at budgeting. Where does my money go, and how do I spend so much on groceries and eating out? And what do I do about this, Nolan? I mean, this is something that, I don't know, I think all of us, except Betsy on the call, struggle with. Where does my money go, and how do I keep track of it? And how do I keep this leakage, from happening? And so, Nolan, I mean, you're an expert in this world. What are your techniques?
Well, yeah, I am super passionate about this topic for sure. And I do think it's something, as you said, Charlie, like, to our clients out there, you're definitely not alone in that feeling. I think this has come about because we hear it all the time about how people don't feel like they know where their money's going. So, I think budget can kind of be a nasty word for some people. They don't really love it. It can feel kind of constricting, but really, I think a budget or maybe a spending plan, we could call it, really should bring about freedom to a person's life, a couple's life, because, really all the things we hear is that people feel controlled by their money in a way because they don't know where it's going. So the hope is that by tracking the spending, that it brings freedom to your life and the freedom to spend. So I kind of wrote down 3 things here there where I think our clients could start off at. First, to have a spending plan, you have to track your spending. So I think this can be a surprise to many people once they do track it, just how much they spend a month and where that money is going. And as you said, Charlie, food, groceries, that kind of seems to be a budget item that tends to run pretty high during the months for most people, especially families. So I would recommend an app. I still like an Excel spreadsheet, but I do use an app as well to track my spending, and it's called YNAB. You Need a Budget. And so this has become a very popular app, and it's as simple as download the app. You can it's a 30-day free trial. You put your card information in there, and it'll automatically upload it to the app, and you can see, that's a very easy way to track your spending instead of having to write, each expense down. Second, I would just see what areas stick out when you do look at the spending the next month. Just spend normally like you would, and then the next month sit down and say, wow, that what sticks out here? What can I, what's okay? What can I take out of my spending here and reduce? And then from there, I would just say make goals and be patient with it, because most people don't make a budget and then the next month just automatically have that down. So I would just say start there, and it can't hurt. And I think the ultimate goal would just be to spend less than you make. That's kind of how I feel in my own personal life. So that's kind of what I got, Charlie.
Yeah, that's good. It's one of those, like exercising. It's easy to think about, but it's kind of hard to do. What do you think?
I just had one comment. Nolan loves budgeting, but he's the only one that's not married yet. So I don't know if those things are correlated or what, but I know we'll get to marriage later, Charlie.
That's right. We're going to talk about this one a lot more, because guess what the number one money problem in marriage is, and it's spending. So we're going to talk about that more. But it is an absolute paradox that if you constrict yourself via spending plan or budgeting, which is what you'll do, it is an absolute feeling of freedom with spending, which is totally weird, but that's the truth. I've yet to totally experience that yet, but I know it's true. But anyway, so we'll talk about that more in a minute. But let's jump into the marriage and stuff. We're going to skip our health and wellness segment. We're going to do that next time. I got all excited about health and wellness, but let's jump into the marriage stuff, because I'm dying to get Betsy on the hot seat and hear some stories about her experiences with money and marriage. So, why did we want to talk about this? One of the things is just, it's amazing how we deal with money and finances and investing and all these topics that are fun and exciting for us. But really, what does it matter if someone's struggling with money in their marriage, we're not addressing that, and the marriage doesn't work? What good is all the planning in the world, all the fancy investment stuff, all the strategy, if, first of all, your marriage doesn't work? That's a devastating life event. Secondly, it's a devastating financial event. And I don't even, that's probably not even, the financial side of it doesn't even play into the top 5 as far as the devastation of divorce can cause. And I've experienced that, so I can attest to that as well. But from the financial planning perspective, boy, it doesn't do a whole lot of good, again, to do all that planning if there's cracks in that foundation. So that's why it's super important, and we want to try to just have a little fun today with the panel discussion, hear some fun stories about what we do, in our own personal lives. But let me start off, there was a couple really good articles. One of them was from MarketWatch in January 2018. It says, this common behavior is the number one predictor of whether you'll get divorced. And we've got a link to this in the show notes. But it says, Nearly half of Americans who are married or living with a partner say they argue with the person over money, according to a survey of more than 1,000 people by the Cashlerette, and that's part of the bankrate.com. But most of those fights are about spending habits, like just what Nolan was talking about. 60% people say that one person spends too much or the other is too cheap. So the interesting part about that is another article goes on to say from the Wall Street Journal in January of this year, it says we actually are attracted to opposite people. You know how opposites attract. That may or may not be true in all aspects of marriage, but they say it absolutely is true when it comes to money. In other words, I'm a saver, I'm a planner. I subconsciously seek out someone that is a spender and a non-planner, is what the article says. Betsy, what do you think? Is that bad research? Probably, right?
No, I think that's very accurate, at least in my life. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's what we see too in our planning, is that we always have one person the spender, one person the saver, and we're going to talk about this more, but there's really no right and wrong. And I say spender and saver as if one's right, one's wrong, and that's the whole crux. Is one person thinks, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's where the problems begin. So we'll talk about that more. But Jenny Olson, an assistant professor of marketing at Indiana University, she studies couples' financial decision-making, says, we are drawn to people who can check and balance our own rigid rules about money. Someone who feels they are too focused on saving and not focused enough on using money to enjoy life might look for a partner who can help them feel more comfortable with an occasional splurge. So understand that, that's how we kind of go into this thing called marriage. We have those tendencies, and understand that that's okay. And maybe that basis alone might help head off a lot of fighting and arguing. But the good news about this story, the Wall Street Journal goes on to say, is that the spendthrifts married to the tightwads managed to find some middle ground, learning from one another in the process. This is according to Scott Rick, marketing professor at University of Michigan who studies marital finances. The spouses who don't converge have a harder time, and those marriages are probably more fragile and could end in divorce. He did an analysis of 1,300 couples, which he's got a book coming out, of course. But anyway, it's fascinating. We're going to have a couple practical things that all marriages can do in just a couple minutes. But first, Betsy, I want to pick on you since you're the rookie to the show. I sent out some questions yesterday or the day before. And did you get a chance to look at those? Pick out one that you particularly resonated with and tell us what you think.
I thought, so why do you have money issues in your marriage? I got stuck on the why, because I think there's always issues in marriage, and I don't think issues have to be bad. So the reason why I think me and my husband have disagreements about money is because we're two different people. And I think coming from that understanding that he's got a lifetime of habits and a lifetime of experience, and I've got different habits and experience, and trying to merge those into our plan and kind of our life, I think it makes it an issue. Just like bedtime, right? He stays up late, I go to bed early. It could be an issue if I forced him to go to bed early or if he forced me to stay awake. Same thing with spending and saving. And I think some grace and understanding towards each other goes a long way, at least for me, just understanding that I might be a little bit more rigid or have some different habits than he has.
Awesome. I love that, because what you've done there is what we really try to do in our business. And that's just first understand where somebody's coming from. And a lot of times we'll ask questions like, what's important about money to you? Or what was money like for you growing up? And it's interesting because when I was going through school and they would tell me these questions, I was like, what do I do with that information? And the answer might just be nothing. Just having that understanding gives you the ability to give someone the grace that they grew up very differently than you did when it comes to money. Kevin, what do you have to pile on there?
So first of all, Charlie, most of the clients that we meet with have some dysfunction in the couple when it comes to money. A lot of people think, when they meet with a financial planner, we have to act like everything is good, and you don't. And as Betsy said, there are two people that come together, and some of the reasons I put why money is a problem in marriages is because number one, money matters. It really matters. It's a resource. It's something that we keep score of. We keep score of, especially people that start to get into investing. We want to know how much money someone else has, how much we have. We keep score, and sometimes. And we see this quite a bit, is that you have two high performing professionals and they actually try to beat each other when it comes to how much money they have. So I think this whole idea of keeping score is something, we keep score with everything, and that's money is something we keep score with, unfortunately. Money is power in a relationship. Sometimes the person who's earning the money can make the other person feel like it's my money because I earned it, or vice versa. And so, that's another reason why I think money can be a problem. And then the final thing goes back to what Betsy said about how people grew up. I mean, for some people, money is like pain, like their parents would never give them money and chastise them. And other people, it's, money was a way to get rewarded. So there's so much complexity that comes into money, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And Kevin, I love what you talked about. It is a difficult dynamic. One person is most of the time the breadwinner, and the other is either taking care of the home, kids, or maybe working in a part-time job. Let's say we see that a lot, especially I think the airline industry, and I think that's because pilots travel, and so it's very nice to have that stability at home. Not always that way, but I think in the airlines maybe more than some other professionals, it seems like. But Jon, what do you think? Like, how would you balance that? Hey, I'm not sure in your household, but let's say that you're the higher income earner. How do you manage the marriage and not making the other person feel like, hey, I make the money, and so you're gonna do what I say? Obviously, that's not the right way
Yeah,
to
I
do it. What
think
do you do?
this is one that we've gone through in our 11 years of marriage. We've gone through different stages. And when Andy and I were first married, we were both working. She was a nurse. I was deployed a lot, flying the KC-10 on the East Coast. And so it started out kind of separate. Like we had a joint checking account, but it's very obvious, like, a paycheck rolls in and somebody always is going to make a little bit more, a little bit less than the other person. So there is a little bit of a dynamic there where both people know who makes more money. So I think in the very beginning, it started out that way, but then a lot of the I guess troubles or discussions that came up about money was really when we had our second kid. When Ellie was born, my wife stopped working, so she was staying at home because, like you said, my job requires me to be gone a lot. So, those first few years of our marriage, I was gone more than 180 days a year. So that created this dynamic where she wasn't bringing an income in. My paycheck would come in, and she was basically set up to make all the financial decisions. But on the other side, I was the one tracking everything. So we talk about these apps and we talk about the budget. And I've always been, the budget guy. This is what we're going to spend on this, and these are the restrictions. And I think it built this dynamic where we kind of found out that she felt somewhat isolated or somewhat controlled in that situation. We've developed kind of this new plan on how our budget discussion works. So I would say that I'll make an aviation comparison here. I like the idea of this shared mental model, right? We talk about that in aviation. And if I'm going to brief a departure and I'm going to talk about what's going to happen on this flight, both people need to be on that same model, like have an idea what the goals are. So early on in your marriage, before you ever have the budget discussion, have the discussion about goals, have the fun discussion, right? The budgeting can get mundane and it can get repetitive. The goals are kind of what we're all after. And like you said, a good marriage, a good shared mental model of where everybody comes from with money and where we're headed to is vastly more important than how much money you spend at Target or Starbucks. So those were kind of the early discussions of, hey, we're over budget in this, but we're under budget in this, and flexibility is key. So even today, my wife and I have to have these financial discussions, and typically we'll have them at the end or the very beginning of the month. And we've lots of practice, and the fixed costs of, food and kids' activities and things that we absolutely need, those are already pretty much set. So we just talk about, the big heavy hitters things. October is the month of X, Y, or Z. The weather gets cold, so the kids are probably going to need some new clothes because they've outgrown their fall clothes. We just had that recent discussion. So I think it's dual control. Everybody has to have a say in a budget and in a spending plan, whatever you want to call it. But I think that surprises are typically the ones people get angry about, right? We set a budget in the beginning of the month, and then something comes up or we overspend in a certain category. A lot of clients will start with that. A lot of I's and she and he, and how do I get my wife to be more frugal, or how do I get my husband to enjoy the money more? I think the discussion, more importantly, is how do we get to where we're supposed to be, or how do we get to a spot where we can reach our goals together? Over the course of 11 years, my attitude has changed toward it. But I think the more you can bring somebody in on that discussion, and the more you can have a shared mental model of where we're going, is going to, overall, it's going to produce better results.
Yeah, so that's awesome. And what I hear you saying is you all preempt a lot of stuff. I mean, you plan ahead, you get ahead of potential arguments about money, and you're very open about it. And it also sounds like you're very careful about the words you use, because there's a potential there for some blame. I'll just say, when, let's say you're traveling, you're on TDY, you're the income earner, and Andy is taking care of the house and everything else while you're gone, and you come home and go, you spent too much, you went over budget. That would be obviously very stupid, first of all, but secondly, very counterproductive. But we got to be really careful with those discussions, because when I have a discussion with Lisa, my wife, I have to be very careful, because she's so just sensitive to it being her fault, and our dynamic is that she stopped teaching when we had our youngest child. And so that was the first time in her life she didn't work. And so that was a difficult time for her, because she felt like she wasn't participating in their finances. And I'll throw this dynamic in there too. Her parents, let me think about this. Will they ever listen to this podcast? No. Her parents kind of chided her a little bit about not contributing financially. So you get these other dynamics, which are very difficult. So now I would bring up finances, and I have to be very careful about my words, so that because there was already some, like Betsy, like you mentioned, there's already some history there, right, that I'm stepping into. And I'll never forget one time when we had just gotten married, we were doing our finances, and she said something about going to the dentist. And I said, well, we don't have the money to do that. And I was totally kidding. But she didn't think it was funny. That was not funny at all. And so I learned not to joke like that anymore, because it's a very sensitive topic. But no, that's pretty amazing. So how do you all, Kevin, you're the senior guy here, the smartest, not the oldest, I'm just saying the smartest, but how do you approach these sensitive conversations when maybe you're the one with all the information, the other person doesn't know anything, and you got to communicate maybe an overspend, or we got to do something differently. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I haven't found the perfect way to do it yet. I'm still working on that, but I can, like Einstein said, or was it Thomas Edison? I found 1,000 ways not to do it, so I'm getting closer to the perfection. But some of the things that I've realized is, number one, no early mornings. When people get up, you should not say, "What did you buy last night?" That doesn't go over well. when I'm upset personally, like sometimes there's things, there's the dynamic usually is one person really cares about the budget, if you will, or the money, a spending of the money. That's usually the person that's bringing it up. The other person doesn't really think about it much. So they're kind of getting blindsided by the conversation itself. So if I'm upset, that's not going to go well. I also don't say, let's talk about money anymore. I used to think, hey, we're going to have a conversation about money. That's what you do. You announce what your intention is, right? No, don't do that. I think for me, at least, that has not worked. I think for me, what has worked is talking about goals and trying to understand. My wife's name is Hade, trying to understand what Hade wants in her life and wants in, with her goals, her financial goals, and just learning a little bit more about what she's looking to do. And, we as financial planners, Charlie, we start with goals as opposed to where's all your money going. And I think that's probably been the best for us, is looking at what are our overall goals and are we making those goals come true. And then the final takeaway for me is to let the little details go. It's all details, as the writer of that book said. But, if there's some spending that just to me seems kind of inappropriate, but it's not a big deal, I just need to let that go.
That's wisdom right there, man. Nolan, you hear that?
I tell you what, I am blessed to be on this podcast. Yeah, for our listeners, I'm getting married in 3 months. So as Kevin said, it's funny I'm talking about the budgeting because you get me back on here in a few years, I might have a different response. But yeah, this is great.
Well, you've got a large part of the battle, taken care of because you have the knowledge, and then you just have to put it to work. But what are you and Claire doing to prepare on the money side of things? I mean, you got all the education, the credentials. So what are you doing in action to prepare for the joining of your lives and maybe the joining of your finances? What are you doing?
Yeah. So like you said, I mean, that's our total intention when we get married, combine the finances together. So right now, I think it's just kind of looking internally at our own selves, but also kind of doing that together, so she has her YNAB, I have my own, but we still look at those together at the end of each month. And, kind of as Jon says, like we look forward. Oh yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
You both have YNABs? Did you marry are you marrying the perfect woman? How did this happen?
I mean, that's what I think, Kevin. I'm like, she's pretty dang good. So she's treating me well.
He just met her last week, and she said she had YNAB, and he's like, that's all you need to say. So we're getting married.
No, but it definitely, was not. It took a little convincing for sure, but I think the common theme amongst what, each of you all are saying is the goals, and I think I grew up just, I'm a saver. So, I saved even if I didn't have, when I was younger, I thought that was just the thing to do. I just saved. So I think my expectation when we first started dating and once we got engaged was like, well, that's just what you need to do. It's like, that's how it works. But I think the more we talked about goals, and especially when you're, getting married young, it's like you really do, for us at least, it's like money just isn't coming out of nowhere. So, really trying to save and, we know we're going to have to rent the first few years, I drive a 2009 Nissan Cube that's paid off, but, setting realistic expectations for what's going on, and I know we did a podcast earlier, Charlie, about the high school graduates and college graduates. And for us, I think there's so many opinions that come in everyone's lives, but especially when you're getting married young or just when you're a young person, it's like, maybe you shouldn't be getting married, or like you need to buy a house, or like you need to do this, you need to do that. But I think if just focusing, like being a team together, I think is what we're focusing on, of just this is what our goals are, this is what we can reasonably attain, and then just go from there. But yeah, Kevin, the fact she has a YNAB's a good start. I mean, that's it's pretty darn good.
That's not an easy app either. I'm still working on that, Nolan. I might need your help because I've got like 150 uncategorized transactions, and I need to fix that. So I'm trying to get to that freedom point on the budgeting. I'm not quite there yet. We want to provide some practical stuff too about marriage and money finances, because it is very serious. I mean, and again, if you don't get this spending thing under control with each other, it could end your marriage. And in fact, the article said it's the number one predictor of success in marriage. So we wrote down about 7 tips to help with this. And I'm going to rattle off the first 3. And then Betsy, you can just kind of tell me what resonates with you. And I got to warn you, one of them gets a little bit personal. So just do what you're comfortable with. But the one, and I thought this was great advice. Jon, you mentioned it already. We have like a meeting. We talk about these things. We have I don't know if you set a designated time every week. We don't do this. Lisa and I have like a date night, but we don't have a designated time where we talk about finances. But that's number 1. Set a designated time, maybe weekly, monthly, quarterly, to talk about your finances. It's a business meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and spout out number 2 because it's kind of a corollary. Number 2 is designate date time for red hot monogamy is the name of the book that I got these from. So it's important because guess what? If you have a business meeting on date night, that's bad juju, right? That's not gonna work well. So you're not gonna do that. So separate those 2 things out. Number 1, get yourself a financial meeting weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is. Number 2, have a separate date night. And so that's important. And the number 3 one, and Betsy, I'm giving you a third option so you can comment in case you didn't like the first 2. But the third one is what we've been talking about already, setting goals that you're both excited about. Just over the last week, we've heard people say, hey, we are excited about private school for our kids. That unites people in their spending plans. I told you guys, Kevin, maybe you on a meeting, is like the one time that Lisa and I were the most on the same sheet of music was when we were building this house. Everything that we did aligned spending wise. And I think now I've convinced her that we need a swimming pool. And so now she's cutting spending and all kinds of stuff. And so it's been pretty interesting to see that as well. So Betsy, what do you got? Those first 3, what resonate with you the most?
I think all 3 of those is really just getting to know your spouse or your partner. If you understand where they're coming from, their expectations, your expectations, I think you can better communicate without emotions running high or accusing the other. When you really both are on the same team, you might have different ways of going about things, but I think it's just really about getting to know each other and being kind.
This seems so simple.
If it was only.
Yeah. And the thing that's coming out of what you're saying too is there's just so many things, so many different ways to do this. Sometimes my issue, way long ago, I've long since matured, but I just thought my way was right, and that's it. And boy, that sounds silly saying out loud now, but there's many different ways to be successful.
And I think, like you were saying, most of our clients are pilots, so they're really used to making really big decisions, really important decisions. I mean, and it's all on them, and they make decisions all the time. But I think when you're coming to a spouse who doesn't work with you, right? You kind of more on an equal playing field. It's really hard to feel like a team sometimes, especially if your spouse is making so much more. So I think just being kind and understanding and coming to kind of being nice to each other, I think it goes a long way. I really do. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, having some humility when you come. If you're the major breadwinner and you need to have a conversation, come to your partner with some humility, grace, and even vulnerability. I had one of our persons said this, and this is not being manipulative, it's true. He said, when I had a problem or an issue, the first words with my spouse were, I'm afraid whatever. And that made him very vulnerable and very humble. And it opened up the communication to the other spouse, because they're not coming here, with the sledgehammer to go, you spent too much. So that might be a way to frame things, because sometimes those reactions are based on fear. Jon, what do you got?
Yeah, I think this is a recent conversation I had, and the question I got was, and hopefully you guys can see what's wrong with this one, but they asked, they lead with, I'm a pretty frugal person. How do I get my spouse to be more frugal? And I would say to that, you don't. Because, like we talked about, everybody brings their own interest, everybody brings their own background, everybody brings their own qualities to this marriage, and finances are a big portion of it. So, what I will say is my experience with how I interact with my wife about finances is we try to put everyone's qualities and the things that we're good at, and I try to put those to work. So since I'm the guy with the spreadsheets and tracking all of our spending and I get into the details, when it comes to the budget meeting, I just pass over the budget and say, this is what our monthly budget looks like, and I don't talk. So I try to keep all of our finance discussions when we have our finance meeting less than 15 minutes, because after 15 minutes, we're just too far into the details to discuss the important things. The important things have already been talked about. And my wife's qualities, and she's not a frivolous spender. She's the visionary. She's the one that's good at like looking long term, looking at the goals in life. This is what I want. These are the things that, the priorities for our family going forward. And we talk about those. And then after it, I'll get into the details and I'll say, okay, well, based on what we talked about, based on our goals, here's our monthly savings goal. Because if we take that money and we invest it, we earn interest on this money, that'll take us 2.5 years. And I come up with the plan and the timeline and the structure of how we're going to do it. So I think just like the resounding theme here is getting to know your spouse, like understanding how their parents handled money, understanding how your parents handled money, and then combining that and doing your own thing. Because my family, my internal family now, is not going to run finances the same as the way my parents ran finances or the way her parents ran finances. So coming together and understanding each other is really the key to it all. But the extra thing I'll throw in there is just taking what you're good at and putting that to use instead of trying to bring that person to the way that you want it done or them trying to bring you there. You're going to continue to fight and never find that middle ground. So I think that's definitely a lesson I've learned over the course of the years.
So what I hear you saying is you don't make a budget and then beat your spouse with it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say there very little discussion on my wife's spending habits, because I've had that discussion before. How do you spend that much money at Target? Doesn't ever end well.
That's one of those. Kevin says those are questions that are not really questions, right? That's a great thing that Kevin always says. But what do you got, Kevin?
Well, I was just going to mention that our pilot clients are not financial planners. We're all financial planners. We all dig this stuff, and so how should a pilot come to their spouse, probably not after a 4-day trip, immediately come home and have that discussion. As Jon just said, when we spend money, and when I say we, I mean just us, we think everything we spend money on is smart and it's we're being frugal. But when sometimes our spouse spends money, we think, well, they're wasting money. And then if you do attack, as Jon said, that waste, that you perceive it as waste, be ready for them to then tell you, well, what about those Tennessee volunteer tickets you spend $2,000 on per year? Is that really something that's part of the family mission? So I think just coming to your spouse and saying, look, I just want to talk about goals that we have and just start deciding on what's important in our life and start the process that way. Do not expect this to happen overnight. Try to make it fast, you'll end up causing fights.
That's awesome. And I love the idea that, Andy is the visionary of the family. She has that gift. And by the way, Andy's a very successful businesswoman in her own right. She's running 2 KFC stores and a family business. But I love too how you all, Kevin mentioned mission, you mentioned vision, but it's like our family values, because your spending reflects what's important to your family. And if you look at spending and go, hey, these are not in line with really what we want or what we're trying to do, that's not how you attack it. I'm just saying that you start with those values, you start with that vision, and then you work backwards like we've talked about before. So that's the intentionality, Jon, that you just demonstrated, and your thought process is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it didn't happen right away. So it's been years and years of trial and error, but I think that overall there's a couple things that have served me well as far as like just getting to the bottom line and understanding where, my spouse is coming from when we talk about money. And then overall, like if I was talking to someone in Nolan's position, say like, hey, I'm about to get married, what should I expect? I would say that as you continue to progress in life, like the schedule is only going to get busier. You get married, you have children, life gets increasingly busy. And if you're an airline pilot and you spend half the month away, it's even more busy. So it's hard to get on the same page. So there are still times when talking about finances is difficult, or just finding the time to bring it up is difficult. So as you make more money, I think it's natural that you're going to waste a little bit more money. I think it's natural to have some months where the budget gets completely blown. But for me, it's all about consistency, coming back, not getting on to your spouse about how much money was spent. It's a very much combined effort. Like we can both overspend in certain categories, but I think attacking the things that aren't aligned with your values is the key there. So when you bring out the budget, say how much happiness are we getting out of this Netflix account? How much? So there's certain things that are untouchable, and in the finance discussion for us, my wife loves being physically active. She loves exercise class. She loves playing sports. No matter what she spends on that, it brings her all that happiness. It's healthy. It aligns with our values. That's never part of the discussion. Really, the discussion is what are the things that we're not getting anything out of, that aren't bringing us these good values, that we can attack those extra expenditures. And so that's part of the discussion for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just kind of talking about even when there's frustration on one or the other, just like Kevin said, let it go a little bit if you can, and talk about some things that may be fun, exciting, a little bit more, goal oriented that you both can kind of buy into. So as far as our 7 practical tips, we've got number 1, designate the time weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, to talk business. 2, designate the time to go on date night and not talk business, because those two don't go well together. Number 3, set goals that you're both excited about. You can both get on board. Number 4, I'll go through the next few real quick, and then Kevin, you can comment on those as well. We've talked about it a little bit. Number 4, accept the differences in your marriage. Understand that you're both coming from different positions, and there's many different ways to accomplish this thing. You don't have to be right all the time. That was a long number 4, but that was a message to me. But anyway, number 5, do some kind of budget, expense tracking, something. You don't have to go PhD level on the YNAB, but it probably would be best if you did. And number 6, do not keep the other partner in the dark financially, even if they want you to. This is what I kind of struggle with. Lisa, my wife, would be like, just tell me what I can spend. I'm like, well, look, can we talk about it more? So that's a different dynamic as well, Kevin, but what do you think?
Well, I think, pilots, working with pilots specifically, I think there is a different mindset, because pilots make more money every year for the most part, until maybe you become a captain and you max out, and hopefully you max out at a real high level. But so this conversation sometimes doesn't need to be had. You make more money, and that sometimes can solve any of the problems that you have. So, when you go to the left seat, you have a few more years if you're overspending. And so, the thing we've learned, Charlie, over the years is that there's lots of people that are making the maximum amount of pay and they're still overspending. And so this has to be addressed at some point in time. There are people that, we come across some people that don't spend any money, but that's really few and far between. For me, what I would suggest to everybody is that us human beings, we like new stuff. We like to have fun. We like to enjoy our lives. We work really hard. So eventually we got to have this conversation. And I think that the best thing that we can do is just tell our spouse that, hey, we want to talk about, what our goals are the next few years. Don't say, hey, I just took a class on how to speak to my spouse, but just say, hey, I just want to talk to you about this stuff because this stuff is important to me. It's important to us. It's important for our children. Just start having that conversation because most people are not trained to even start this conversation, Charlie. How do you start this conversation?
Absolutely. And I think seeking out help is a good way to do it. And not just financial planners like us, but my wife and I actually sat down with a budgeting coach. We did a couple of meetings and it was really neat. It was kind of a lot of what we do anyway, but it was much more spending focused. And I think it did help a little bit. It helped us kind of have a better trajectory and maybe broke some of the ice that maybe we were having trouble getting through as far as some of our conversations. But Kevin, I love what you said too about sometimes a conversation maybe is not necessary. Like we have some people that I know and the spending within their means comes very natural to both of them. And sometimes we'll go, well, how did you all save so much money? This is incredible. And they go, well, we just don't spend much. And that's natural to them. But I think that is the exception. I think the more realistic scenario is where you also mentioned, no matter how much we make, airline pilots, both flying possibly, it can go. It'll go, as we say. And there does need to be some conversations and some planning and some thoughtfulness like Jon has done as well. So yeah, that's important. But Betsy, what do you think about, I don't know what it's like for you and Matt, like, do you communicate, is he in the dark on finances? How do you get him engaged if that's the dynamic at all? I'm kind of guessing there a little bit because you're a planner.
No, he's definitely involved.
Okay.
Yep. And he is the breadwinner of our family. So, and that wasn't always true. So I think there was a time where I was making significantly more than him. So I think our dynamic has kind of ebbed and flowed. And I think we learned a lot of the do nots. I think we learned early on that no one's in charge, that we're both in charge, because it can be a power struggle and it wasn't good for us.
Yeah.
What was your question, Charlie?
All right, let me ask you this. Forget about that question because this is better. How do you, like, you're both in charge.
Yeah.
What happens when you disagree? Does somebody have a veto hammer? How does that work?
I think we have agreed to talk about big financial decisions before they happen. I think surprise really is not a good thing when it comes to finance or really anything. Just setting expectations that we're going to talk about things, setting maybe a money limit, or like, hey, just a heads up, my car is needing new tires. I'm going to spend $2,000 on new tires or whatever it is. But I think just talking about decisions coming up and like leaning on him. He's a great teammate. He makes great decisions. He married me, so I need to ask him what he thinks about our finances and decisions.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I mean, just so many times we think about this as a difficult thing to navigate. And it is, there's challenges, but at the same time, two heads are better than one. If you learn to work well together, and I think the statistics bear it out. I didn't write them down, but as I was preparing for this, if you compare the wealth of married or partnerships, married couples versus single, then it's higher, even in relation to the amount of income and things. So I think that is a testament to the positive that can come out of this. But the last one there, number 7, is just understanding each other's, and we call this money tapes, which to me is always a weird phrase, but that just means understanding where people are coming from. You mentioned this like very early on, Betsy, in this podcast, of just having an understanding of what it was like when someone else grew up with money. Because a lot of people we talk to, they say, hey, we didn't have any money growing up. We were very poor. And so can you imagine the powerful emotions behind money and finances, whether good or bad? I don't know, it would depend, but boy, you better be aware of that as a spouse, just the understanding. And the last story I'll tell on my own spouse and our differences is that I've come to learn that for me, money is about security. I'm like Nolan, if I could just save money, that's all I care about. and maybe buying a tractor too. That's kind of nice. But if I could just save money, that makes me happy. And seeing those bank account balances being healthy. My wife does not have a clue unless I tell her how much money we have in the bank, because she kind of doesn't care. What money means to her is like bringing joy to other people, removing obstacles, being able to help people, and she doesn't have a concept for what a good amount is, quite frankly. In her money tapes, she grew up, her parents were both entrepreneurs, had their own businesses, and they had what I think what used to be called, Kevin, help me out, it's an accounting, cash slush fund or something, I can't remember, petty cash. Remember as a business, you have petty cash, and literally it was in this little money bag that the banks had for you. So she had access to this petty cash money bag anytime she wanted. So I have to often say, honey, we don't have the money bag. But I'm very careful to not do that in a demeaning way. But that's just how she grew up. So those are our differences. But just recognizing and understanding those goes a long way. But what do you all think? Any parting shots?
I'll just say that for the frugal people that are out there, how much is enough? And that's the hard part. Sometimes our spouse, when we're saving everything, starts to wonder, how much is enough for you to save? When are we going to live our life? When are we going to have some fun? And so I just think we have to realize that time is finite. Money is finite too, but just saving money all the time, if you're that spouse, that's not always the best way to live your life.
I would say as a recovering ultra frugal person, I would say that, my wife and her outlook on money has brought a lot of awesome experiences for me, and just kind of an understanding of like a different way to live with money. And so I've had tons of life experiences and spent some money that I totally don't regret. All of that being, when I'm still contributing to my retirement accounts, I'm still doing the things that I want to do, but my wife has brought me to the middle of that road. So just in the background, understanding that we're still saving money, we're still thinking about the future, but it's obviously a good thing to spend money now. Spend money while you're young, while you're still healthy, while you're with your kids. All of these moments that we have are fleeting, and time is a thief. And I have come to that realization because of her. So I think that, the discussions that you have with your spouse, they can greatly improve your outlook on life. So frugality is not always the answer. It's key to find a good middle ground, be on the same page, and it's definitely a learning experience. It changes all the time, month to month.
Yeah, I think I'm getting out of this today just finding those positives and focusing on them, focusing on the goals that you're excited about, the things that your spouse is good at financially, and moving to that middle ground and being appreciative for someone that is helping you to be less extreme, whatever that extreme might be. So Nolan, what do you think as far as your journey that you're getting ready to embark on, things you're taking away from this?
Yeah, I just for one, Claire's gonna love Jon when she listens to this. Just two, she's but you need to talk to old Jon more. But no,
it's gonna save you some time, Nolan.
That's right. Save you some time. But no, I mean, I'm just taking away two heads is better than one. Like you said, Charlie, focusing on the positive, because Claire's the same way. She might have the wine ab. I know she does it for me. It's not like she would not do it if it wasn't for me. And that just shows, I guess, I'm with the right woman. She loves me a lot, but, so I have to give, she's giving of that. I know that's not her, she doesn't think about finance like I do all the time. Like you said, Charlie, I would save everything if I could. But as Jon said, there is a happier way to live life, even though I like seeing that money in my bank account. I think she's a good balance and balances me out, and I can already tell that in the future when we do have kids, and or even just us two, spending money on some experiences, but also she knows the importance of like Jon said, saving money in the 401k, doing all these things. And as Kevin said, there's that point where, okay, I'm doing all of these things, now we can reward ourselves, so that's kind of what I've gathered from today.
Awesome. Life is too short to squabble over some of the little things, but have some good conversations about goals and your values, and then just be patient, right? Be patient, understanding, be kind, like Betsy says, and afford the other some grace. Thanks for joining us today on Flight 67, Marriage and Money. How the heck does it work? And I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Pilot Money Guys podcast. It has been our pleasure to share some information with you today. Give us a call to discuss absolutely any investment question you may have. Click on the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit leadingedgeplanning.com to learn more. Take care.
Leading Edge Financial Planning, LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Leading Edge Financial Planning and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.leadingedgeplanning.com. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. These documents may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for, decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such.